people to join us.
That's right. People will be joining us shortly. We will be prepared for them, and we're going to begin this class somewhere in about a minute or two.
Yeah.
About a minute or two. We're gonna
1 to 2 minutes.
We're gonna get going. We're gonna go for it, baby.
That's right. And Jeff's gonna stop mowing.
Yep. We're on my porch tonight.
It's gonna be great.
Wonderful neighborhood boss.
Yeah. It's the neighborhood Don.
Is finishing up mowing this empty lot, which is nice. You know, one night, Rylan, I was walking and over there at the edge of it, I got double scared by a snake.
Whoa.
Yeah.
A snake in the empty lot?
It was not. It had come. It clearly lives there, or did at some point.
Probably not anymore.
Yeah. And it had crawled out on the street. It was like.
The big snake?
It was in the summer. No, it was small.
Small snake.
But it was still a snake.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the operative. I don't think you caught that word. That's the word. That's the only word you need to know.
Was it a poisonous snake?
There's no descriptors.
There's a few things that you need to know.
It was a capital S snake.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sounds like maybe it was a large worm.
No, it was a snaky snake.
There have been some large worms. They crawl out onto the.
There are large worms,
road tops.
but this was not one of those.
Okay.
Do you see a lot of the frogs? There's a lot of toads there.
No, I saw a smushed frog.
Well, there's one of those in our garage right now. Kelly apparently gave it the old
over
squishy
in the van?
when she was coming in home the other day.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
Hey,
gross.
let us know you're here. Okay, Brent and Isla are here.
All right.
Brent and Isla are definitely enjoying that dialogue about reptiles and amphibians in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Clearly,
Your
they
garage.
would. Or a garage, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it wasn't clear that the frog came into the garage and was squished there, or if it was rolled into there.
We had a frog once in our garage
that
Abby Grace was little and had named. There's 2 frogs, and I guess it liked just to sit under the tire, and so she pulled out one night, and you could hear it pop. From inside the van. It was unfortunate.
That's a little much.
It was
man.
unfortunate, and Abby Grace was not happy.
Yeah. That's
I don't know
terrible.
what you do, man.
Can't do anything about that.
No.
Yeah, there's
Can't
nothing
live
you can do
under a
about that.
tire.
Yeah.
Frog.
There's no bouncing back from that. Okay, all right. So Dave and Celia are here, also enjoying the neighborhood.
They get the double lawnmower, probably.
Yeah.
You can hear it from their house and in the
Can you guys through the microphone? Could you guys hear? Is the lawnmower mowing? It's not too bad, is it? Is it too bad?
It's pretty loud from where I'm sitting, but I don't know what you guys are hearing.
Yeah. Hopefully it'll be okay.
You know why they're not replying? Because they can't hear us.
They don't know because of the
lawnmower.
lawnmower. Yeah. Yeah, that could be a thing. You're right. That could be a problem. Well, we'll know if they don't.
This is his 5th time to go over that exact same spot.
Yeah, he's really mowing the stew out of that. So.
She says yes.
Well, we don't know what that means.
She can hear us perfectly fine.
I guess,
and not hear the lawnmower at all. That's great.
Amphibians are okay, Brent says. Snakes, not so much. I'm on board with that. Totally on board with that, Brent. Must definitely. Snakes give me the heebie-jibbies.
I'm more of like a arachnophobia guy. You know, like bugs, spiders, snakes.
I need to show you the spider that we've had living here. Have you seen it?
Is it still there?
Yeah, it's still there.
Wow,
it's been awesome.
That's an aged spider.
It
was there a few weeks ago when we came.
It's really awesome. Okay, so I didn't tell you why the snake double scared me. I don't think I was clear about.
No, you did say it double scared you.
It double scared me. I didn't. So I was walking. You know, I'm a man of many laps.
Yes.
Okay. And I made my first lap, and I came across, and the snake was there. I didn't notice it because I'm listening to my audiobook, you know, and I'm just walking, and then I come up to it, and I just like jump out on my shoes. I mean, I'm like, ah!
Yes.
You know, that's definitely the reaction I have if I ever see a snake. I'm like, completely fall apart.
Freak out.
Okay, and so, but then I gathered myself together and I kept walking, okay?
Yeah.
And then I came back to see his face, and obviously, my heart rate is still up because of the snake.
How fast you're walking.
Yeah, yeah. Snake. Well, and the snake, yeah, the walking wasn't that bad, but the snake. And so I come back, and I'm like looking, I'm like making sure, and I get back to the spot, and I'm like, do I see it in the grass? It's not in the street. So I'm like looking, it's in the grass, so I see it close. Does it like come back? And finally I'm like, I guess it went away. And then I took like 2 more steps forward, and there it was on the ground.
Was it moving like towards you, or
no? It was
just
going
chilling
further. It was further down the street, and so I didn't look far enough, and so right at the time where I'm like, oh, it must be gone.
That's when I had that. Well,
it was ridiculous. I wish I had a camera of that.
There we go. Louder through the broadcast. It drowns out the natural sound through the windows.
The mowing, yeah, Dave, we are hopeful.
We're hopeful for that.
We were more, he's really getting that one little section there.
I'm telling you.
He must think there's a snake that lives right there.
He's trying to take care of that for you.
Okay.
I mean, look, when I was coming over here, there was like one small patch of grass
like
left for him
4
to mow.
feet. Yeah.
And that was like 20 minutes ago.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just go ahead and let's start working on class. Guys, this is going to be the last of our classes of
The Road to Us.
The Road to Us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where we do church history.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're going to do next week? Should we talk about it now, or?
Let's do.
Okay.
Why not?
Okay. So what we're going to do?
Now you piqued my interest.
Yeah. Over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about the wisdom of Israel. Okay. It's not just going to be like the wisdom literature that we've done before, because we are gonna pick up some notes in Proverbs. Well, I've been thinking we may actually have like a note from Proverbs each time that kind of frames it. But then we're gonna look at some of the Apocryphal books.
Oh, really?
I think that would be fun.
Okay.
And I think I think the Apocrypha is something that most of us are aware of, but it's really influential during the time of Jesus.
He's just driving up and down the road
He's
now.
mowing the street now, yeah. No, he's blowing it all out. That means he's really close to being done now. He's really close to being done now. It does appear that he's just mowing the street, but
it's not what's happening. Okay,
See,
so
no,
Apocrypha.
Oh, no, he's coming back. Okay.
Apocrypha, which are the books that if you have like a Catholic version of the Bible,
Sure,
they're
yeah.
like right there in the middle between the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Yeah, they're written between those. Okay,
Yeah.
And so we're gonna look at some of those. I think it's one of those things that most of us know, like they're there. We know why they're not canon, and that's I agree with that. Okay, but they were really influential to like the mindset of Jesus' time, and I think we should. I think it would be good for us to know a little bit about them.
Yeah, I mean they're kind of mentioned in some ways in the New Testament, right? In a few books.
There are times that they're alluded to, yeah, for sure.
Alluded to, okay, yeah, that's a better way to say it.
Yeah, and also too, if you want to think about it this way, we've been working on history. Like we talked about the story of Scripture, the history of the Scripture.
Yeah.
Like that story, and we've talked about church history. All the things that have come since then. But if you look at what's happening in those books, it's kind of like pre-church history. In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's all that culture that leads up to the New Testament. Okay?
Yeah.
And so I want us to kind of look at those, and we're not going to do that for like months and months and months, but I think
Sure.
having a few weeks where we talk about some of those are really neat. And if you haven't ever read some of those apocryphal books, hopefully it'll be something that'll be pretty interesting to you.
So we're talking about like the Maccabees, first and
Maccabees
second
books.
Enoch.
Enoch is
right?
one. There are a couple of books that are like Proverbs. One's like called The Wisdom of Solomon, okay, or just Wisdom. There's a book called Sirach. It's really interesting to read. My favorite is I'm going to indulge a little bit. We're going to start off with my favorite of all of them, though.
Okay.
It's called the Book of Tobit.
Tobit.
You ever read Tobit?
I think I've read all of these.
Have you really?
We had a discussion about them a while back,
yeah,
and
that's right.
it was like last year.
That's right.
It was towards the end of last year. I read most of the ones.
Well,
that
look
I
how
thought
you're
that looked
prepared already.
interesting. If I can remember any of it.
Yeah. So we're going to go into Tobit. We're going to do Tobit next week, and then we'll start talking about some of these other apocryphal books.
Tobit's not a long one, is it?
No, it's very short.
Okay.
Yeah. If you wanted to get online and find a version to read, it would suit you well. I'll look at that.
All right. I think that means we can start class.
We're starting class proper now. Okay, let's talk about this. So we've been working on this class of church history that brings us up to this last month. Last week we kind of ended sort of in the 50s, you know, with the turn away from kind of that apocalyptic stuff to more of a
like post World War II kind of.
Yeah, well, definitely moving into that moment, yeah. And we talk about, especially about the church, like moving from this apocalyptic perspective, you know, and becoming maybe more mainstream, I guess, in some ways. The last thing that I would say about this is that when we move from the 50s, really from the 40s, 50s, it's kind of the heyday of American denominationalism. Okay, and a lot of the way that we think of the denominations, okay, is really about what happens in post World War America, where you have kind of this scramble for establishing these kind of brand identities in the churches, and it's connected with the way that we do missions. There's a lot of things that are connected there, but this kind of idea that you could go anywhere in the country and walk into a building with a certain kind of name on it, and things would kind of be universal.
What you're used to.
Yeah, they would be what you're used to. You would know what to expect.
So that wasn't the case before this,
well,
necessarily?
I would say from 1900 to 1950, it kind of evolved that way. I think pre-1900, I don't think it's like that. I don't think it's really like that, okay? But what we talk, that's kind of the movement from, you know, especially pre-Civil War, it wouldn't have been like that, right? But, you know, you get post the Civil War, and we kind of move from, we talked about how that we move from, like, frontier religion, and the cities are more settled, all this kind of stuff. There's another kind of cultural move that happens at this point, and that is, we should say, like, the residential mobility of Americans greatly increases, okay? So that, I think we've talked about before, like, this 1950 is a very important, like, demographic moment, because at that point, more than half the population of the country lives in cities. That's a good, like, peg to kind of say. So, like, the big metropolitan areas. And before that, it's not that way. And really the model of life, which many of us kind of assume now, where you grow up and go to school, and you get old enough and you go to, like, a university or something like that, and then you go find a place to live after that, and it may or may not be close to your hometown. It's a very established, or at least by the 2000s, it was very, very established, you know, kind of, that's kind of when it was peaking. I believe it's kind of regressing a little bit now. People are more likely now to live in their hometown than they were a few years, even a few years ago. Well, or to, like, go to community college or something like that, and, you know, go to school and then come back home, has become much more common in the years post, like, the 2008 recession, you know. But up to that point, the trajectory was more and more for people to live in towns that weren't where their parents lived. And think about for the classes, and if you guys want to chime in, I don't. I'm just looking at the people that are here, and I think most of the people that are on that have been a part of our class over time it's very rare for there to be 3 consecutive generations living in the same hometown. Okay, or at least, like, for both families, for both the husband and wife. I mean, that's just that's become much more rare. Of course, you and I both grew up on the other side of the planet.
Yeah, for a while.
For a little bit, and then and regionally still, and me too. I mean, I grew up in only a couple of hours from here, but it was not a guaranteed thing at all that when I went to school, my parents didn't assume that I was going to come back home.
Right, yeah.
You know?
I don't know what my parents assumed.
Yeah, but I mean, you kind of get you know, it kind of, like, where you live kind of follows a career trajectory.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's kind of the larger American assumption in a lot of ways.
And I think especially, like, I know you said after the recession, people are more at home. I don't know if that's because of availability of jobs, but, like, if you found a job somewhere, you had to go there and take that job, like, a lot of times.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, one of the things that happened in post-World War II is, of course, the GI Bill, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that model of like grow up, go to university, go find a life, like that really began to set those norms very differently. That wasn't necessarily a norm, pre that age. For the great kind of middle class America, okay?
Yeah.
Up to that point, middle class America, like you go and you find like an industrial like line job, and it's enough to pay your mortgage and that kind of stuff. And post World War II, it becomes more about the university education, and secondary education has just become more, even postgraduate, education has become more and more important for a lot of people. And that may be some of the stuff that we're wondering if we don't know if that's going to continue or not.
Yeah.
But one of the features of that is that it created this cycle where churches were recruiting young professionals who had moved to town. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the model. And it helped a lot to have a strong denominational. I think of them as like brand identities now, right? Like just like you can go into any 7-Eleven and or Exxon or whatever, what they're going to have, because this is also the time period of the rise of the brands, right? Like the great American brands are all right. The marketing age is all during this age, and just like you can go anywhere and get a Big Mac and it's going to taste the same as a Big Mac somewhere else. You can go get a Coke and it's going to be the same as Coke anywhere in the U.S. So
you're saying that churches,
yep,
as far as like the denominations of different churches, kind of as they were spreading out, became more similar. So like as people moved around, they wanted to know, hey, if I go from Nashville and go live in Memphis, the church there is going to look like my church back home.
Yeah.
And maybe have some ties or whatever, and have some of the same people in common.
Yeah. And we started to have this kind of there was this real movement to say, if there's not a church of our kind in a community, let's go plant a church of our kind in that community. Yeah. Okay. That was a real driving question for the mid 20th century. Okay. A real driving impulse, and it's not a negative thing. That was a good. I think there's a lot of good that came from that, but it also meant that our identity became competing against the other brands. Okay, that became the shift. Now, if you think about like what's happening for like Campbell and all those guys in the very early, I think they're actually trying to compete against history. They're saying this is what we've come from, and we've had these movements of history that were all of these different. There's this layers of tradition have built up, and we want to move past that to the New Testament era. Yeah, that's the Restoration vibe. Okay?
So it's kind of an indirect competition against other denominations, but really the direct kind of thing that they were
actually,
saying.
I think at the beginning they're not even trying to compete against the denominations. They're trying to actually change them.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay, like they're trying to like convince the Presbyterians down the street, hey, this is actually what's important to the faith. This is the stuff that you don't need to worry about, and you know what I'm saying. And they're trying to convince. And I think that's a very, very different movement. Okay, I don't think that's happening. That's not really what's happening in the 1940s, 50s. What's happening more is we do try to convert individuals to come be part of our movement. But we're not really looking at converting wholesale churches or like persuading them to take on these positions, which means that so there's a real difference between a persuasive discussion between two parties and a debate that happens in front of a third party. Okay. And of course, we know this politically, because now there's going to be the big. I guess it's tomorrow. Is tomorrow the last debate?
We got the last debate tomorrow.
Oh man, I need to find something else to do.
I guess it's
find some way. Anyway, so here's what I guarantee you is not going to happen in that debate tomorrow. Like, Donald Trump is not going to try to change Joe Biden's mind about anything. Yeah, he's not going to try to change his mind. It's not happening. Okay, and Joe Biden's not going to try to change Donald Trump's mind about anything either. Okay, What they are trying to do is they're trying to beat up on each other. I hope it actually doesn't become physical. I feel like there's at least a chance.
There's a chance.
There's a chance. When I look back, you look back in history, and there were times where like we had politicians that actually fought like duels and like literally tried to kill each other or did kill each other. And I think about that, and I'm like, well, at least we haven't gotten that bad yet. But I feel like there's a possibility. Yeah.
But they're not trying to convince each other.
No, they're trying to convince
like,
a third party. And so any amount of like ridicule that they can put on the other in front of the third party, and that's really important, right? Because when you're trying to persuade a third party, you're not actually you don't have to play fair in terms of the other person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm trying to directly persuade you of something, like I have to enter into that conversation in good faith, and that you are in good faith, and we're like actually trying to work through something. Okay. And the reason I'm saying this because you get into these denominational arguments, these inter-tradition arguments, and they're not really trying to convince each other. They're trying to convince the people that aren't affiliated to come join, or the people that are loosely affiliated to leave that.
And are they doing this mostly with their newsletters and things? Or
well, no. This just becomes. I mean, for us, it becomes about preaching. It's like what's happening in the churches. Yeah. And the reason I'm kind of going down this trail, the reason I think this is like really important, is that what then takes place is we spend a lot of time. We're not the only church by far that's doing this. Okay, this is true in other circles, and it is still true. In fact, I think this is really true in like some mainline progressive kind of churches now still too, just like it is in really fundamentalist kind of churches. Mm-hmm. They spend a lot of time and a lot of attention on what makes them distinct from the other churches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And I think most of us understand what that experience was like.
Yeah, we've had that experience at some point in our lives, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I understand it. In fact, I understand that impulse very much so. And it kind of comes from two things. It comes from both trying to kind of sell and convince other people to come join, individuals to come join you. But it also becomes about insulating the people that are a part of your movement from like going other places too, right? And so a lot of the things that were different about our churches than other denominational groups, we kind of got into this era where that's what you heard, over and over and over and over and over and over and over.
Yes.
And over again. Okay.
Yeah. But I think there's a third thing too. Like there were people doing that really, like even us at times, like really truly believe the things that you're saying, not just because you want someone to stay at your church, right? I mean, you want that, and you want them to know the truth. And so a lot of times, this is my truth. This is the way that. And usually you don't even say that. This is the truth. Yeah. And we're telling you. And if you depart from this, then boy, you're in trouble. Right?
Yeah. What I'm saying is, I think there was this like in the background.
Yeah.
Subconsciously, there's like this definition of what the battleground was.
Yeah.
The battleground is people are choosing between churches. Okay. So let's focus on the things that make our church better than other churches. Okay. That's important because I think where we're at right now, I think a lot of people look at the church in modern spaces, okay, in the West, in the U.S., as being post-denominational in a lot of ways, okay. And when I say post-denominational, what I mean is that there's a sense that battleground has changed, that's different. And now the question isn't which church are people going to go to. It's are people going to be a part of the movement of Jesus? And that seems to be a very different kind of question. Yeah. And finding ways to address that.
That makes sense too, right? Like so, when most people go to a church, then your recruiting tactic or the way you evangelize is you take people from other churches and they come to your church, right?
Right.
But when you have a large group of the population that just doesn't go anywhere, you can kind of you go into more of the getting people back mode, right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
That's not as important.
Well, you go back to the fundamental story about what God's doing in the world through Jesus.
Yeah.
Because if you start at here are the very fine points about weekly taking of the Lord's Supper or something like that, and they're just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Or finer points about what kind of worship is acceptable in which movements of the story. Like that.
Yeah, and you're talking to someone who's really not interested in any of it.
Yeah,
right?
They just don't care.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Yeah.
And so for a missional vibe, I think that's a significant kind of thing about where we're at now. And by the way, this is not just something that we're facing. This is something that really trying to give this from a broad church history kind of framework, okay? Because the movement that we see is that denominational loyalty across churches, across denominations, is much lower. And so when people move to a new city, they don't necessarily say, well, I want to find the new Church of Christ, or Baptists don't move to a new city and say, I want to find the right Baptist church. So those two actually are probably stronger in that area than others are.
Yeah.
But your Presbyterian friends, they don't move to St. Louis and then say, well, we've got to find a Presbyterian. That's not necessarily true. They look for a church in their neighborhood that has good programs for the kids, and you guys are. Oh, that's weird. You guys don't have instruments. That's kind of strange.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of a thing, right? The denominational affiliations of people across the U.S. in the last Pew Research studies.
Yeah, that's my next question. Like, how do we know that this is a thing?
Yeah, this is stuff like sociology of religion, like study, and we just know that the likelihood that people that grew up in one faith, in part of a brand, now we know that they're more likely to not do that. Yeah. Okay.
What do you think? Do they know the reason behind that? Like what is causing people? Is it that people are?
Well, there's a lot of speculation about it, as you might
you
might suggest. But personally, I think that one of the most compelling things is that it just has to do with the way that we think about authority in our culture. Okay, and that are just the glue behind institutions is just less than it was. Mm-hmm. Okay, you gotta remember, it also used to be that you worked for the same company forever and ever. Mm-hmm. And you went to work at Ford and you worked there until you started collecting your pension. And that's all of that's just very different now. Yeah. And so people expect some degree of shifting. I think it also has to do with something that we might be surprised by. But this is so funny. This is really kind of funny to me, though. Okay, we began as this kind of non-denominational movement, right? Mm-hmm. That our adherence shouldn't be to this greater institution. And honestly, I kind of think that we were kind of ahead of that. And I think there's one of the things that's happened is that you have the rise of non-denominational church movements. Okay. Which mostly have their roots in Baptist churches, but that's not completely true. There's other movements in community church movement, and the non-denominational churches. There's been a rise of these things, and ironically, I find that churches of Christ a lot of times aren't recognizing that that's there. So we're almost like, you guys shouldn't be a part of that non-denominational denomination. Be part of our
non-denominational.
Our denominational non-denomination. Yeah, right. But I really think there's just some things that we were saying for a long time, guys. Churches shouldn't be adherent to all these superstructures like that. We have that non-institutional bias in our DNA, and I think it's the rest of the world kind of has that a little bit more now. And I think that's one of the reasons. And also, I think there's just I think we have more of an emphasis on what makes for an effective church now. Okay. And people want to go to churches that are effective in doing things to them, for them, with them. Mm-hmm. They want churches that are going to help their kids grow up in faith. They want to be a part of a church that makes a difference in their community and things like that. And people just have a lot less tolerance for churches that seem to be crossing all the right boxes, but aren't really doing.
That are kind of empty.
Yeah.
Hollow.
That's right. I think there's a lot of different reasons, but I think those are among the reasons. That kind of gets us close to some of the things I want to spend this last half hour of our time talking, reflecting on this stuff, and that is, this.
Did you see Jordan?
That may be. It says Jordan. I think it's probably Eleanor, is what I think.
Oh.
Maybe not though. Maybe it is Jordan. We're glad for whoever's on the other end of that comment.
Could be Paul.
Could be Paul. Logged in on Jordan's phone.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about what it means when to look from the. So everything that we've been doing is upstream. Yeah, we're out in the middle of the river, man.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and everything that we've done up until this point is like what the river has brought to us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and there's a mainstream. There's some other tributaries that have kind of come and offered their piece along the way, but all the way back from when we're talking about early church history to Nicaea and the Reformation and all that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of forks in these, but we've been looking at things. I want us to think about some of the things that are gifts that the river has brought to us, and then I want us to kind of look upstream. I want us to look down. I want us to look upstream and see think about some of the gifts that we've been receiving. Okay, and then I want us to turn and look downstream and say, what are some of the things that we expect, or some of the questions that we have, coming further. Okay, and if you guys would like to comment on these, and you would like to comment about either something that you think, looking upstream, are gifts that our tradition, both in the greater church tradition and also in the Restoration Churches of Christ, what are some of the gifts that have been brought to us through that stream? I'd love to hear that. And then if you have some questions about where things are going in the future, I'd love for us to kind of think about that.
Or ideas of what gifts we want to give downstream.
That's right.
From us, right?
That's right. Okay, so let's start with kind of picking up from where we were. Okay, I think one of the gifts of our tradition, particularly among churches of Christ, is this kind of congregational resistance to like denominational authority, okay, or institutional authority.
Yeah.
There's this like congregational independence, this congregational autonomy thing, and I actually think that's like a really good starting place, because trying to figure out like what. Oh, was that your first one?
That's my third one.
Oh, okay. I think that's been I think that's really good, because if we can remember it. And remember that we really aren't compelled to conform to what the Church of Christ, 100 miles from here does. We're just not bound to that. And we used to insist on that.
Yeah.
Almost legally.
I think that still happens, right?
Yeah.
It's not used to be like there's a lot of different types of churches of Christ.
Sure.
Whole, because we're independent, there's a huge difference even in this town.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that should be celebrated. I really think in our tradition, we ought to be able to look at what other churches are doing and learn from it, but I think there is this so I've got a friend that works in another church, and their church is they get letters from other churches about being, we heard you guys having this person come speak at your church, and he's a heretic, and you don't need to have anything to, and man, I just feel like we need to have some freedom from all that. And I feel like Cedar Lane, I really appreciate. I never feel compelled, and our elders, they never ask, hey, is this going to be affected by the people down the street? That is a great question. Oh, man. They are totally worried about that too, Dave. Okay, we're going to come to that.
Yeah, we'll read the question in a minute.
Yeah. Man, you better believe they're asking that question. But I think that congregational spirit, the independence of that, I think by and large that gives us freedom to really think about what is it, just really pragmatically, like, what is it that would work for our community? What is it that works reaching out to the people in Tullahoma? Or what is it that that just best suits the nature of our people? What kind of worship practices just work best for us?
Versus the assumption that God wants every church to look exactly the same.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is kind of what traditionally I feel like I was taught, maybe, or that I heard a lot.
Yeah, and ironically, like on one hand, we would be like, it's wrong for there to be we're strongly anti-denominational, but also being like, hey, all the churches really need to look alike. Yeah, like well, hold on like that, So I think reclaiming that, the spirit of that, is actually something that's a gift from our heritage. And like I said, if we open our eyes and look around, churches are thriving around the country in that spirit. The most successful churches have been ones that have kind of like decided, hey, we're not gonna do what some denominational office is telling us we need to do. We're gonna try to see what would be most effective in this community. And I appreciate that. Now, Dave asked a really, really important question here. Okay, and that is, he says, what do you think the implications of lessening of brand loyalty will be on church-affiliated universities? Probably is into the downstream look. Okay, so if you don't know yet, most of our church-affiliated universities are already in the place where they have more students that are not affiliated with Churches of Christ than students that are. And I think that's surprising for some of our folks. But I'm not sure about Freed. I believe Harding's crossed that threshold. I know Lipscomb, ACU certainly are. And that's significant. The question is I think my question immediately for that, Dave, is what are alumni of those universities going to do in terms of supporting those universities? Those universities are finding ways, and this is a big question, they are finding ways of reaching students and trying to offer the gifts of our fellowship to those students and evangelize and convert those students.
Yeah. They're still, like at Lipscomb, they're still going to Bible classes. You have to do a Bible class every semester, But as you said, a lot of the kids didn't grow up in Church of Christ or church at all.
Yeah.
And don't know like the really basic things. So one of the things they have to make sure they do is have a really good, like my mom works in the nursing program. They got to have a really good nursing program that's going to graduate a lot of kids, and that draws people there.
Well, right? and they have a rediscovery of their evangelistic mission to students.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that they've been doing. But the question is, are people that move away from those like I know my alma mater, Harding, is really wrestling because most of like Gen X, like some of those like brand distinctive things that Harding's still been pretty conservative about, have kind of ruffled the feathers of some of the people in my generation. And one of the questions comes up is like, are all those people are the millennial graduates that are coming out right now, and the Gen X people, are they going to continue to send their kids back to those schools?
Right. Yeah.
We would. Kelly and I would. We hope that'll be something that our girls and Deacon would move to. But who knows? How that's going to work. And that's why we've been in conversations. We've been in conversation with Lipscomb over the last, even yesterday, I got a text from a professor up at Lipscomb that's like trying to think through what they can do, new models of interacting with churches, because it's not just about the students they pull in, but it's also about the relationship that they have to the churches in general, right? Like if all the churches of Christ are just like, well, whatever, and might as well support the Nazarene Trevecca instead of that becomes kind of a thing.
There's a really draw that like a lot of the community colleges are free now, and so like, are you going to spend $40,000 to send your kid to Lipscomb, or are they going to go a couple years for free?
Yeah, it's a huge question. It's also a question for like for publishing houses. Okay, like there's other institutional things like universities that we maybe for our fellowship, the universities are the biggest, the most obvious, but you also have like curriculum publishing houses, okay, or things like the Gospel Advocate, or whatever that that for a long time, Church of Christ, like they bought their curriculum from there or wherever, and those effects have really dwindled over time, and it's different. Yeah. And the question is, well, what happens if you all of a sudden don't have those publishing houses? Does it become harder? For instance, this book I was going to reference in a minute. This is put out. It's by people in our fellowship, and it's by Abilene Christian Press. Well, what happens if that brand affiliation isn't as tight anymore? So there's some big questions there. Let's talk about another gift. What's another gift that you want to offer?
One that I thought of was the love and understanding of Scripture.
Yeah.
In our tradition is a really a gift that I feel that I've always thought I've been appreciative of.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I think about the way that's kind of evolved over time, we still have I think, a tremendously high place of Scripture as a part of our church's identity. The amount of time that we kind of put into reflecting on Scripture is pretty remarkable. And the amount of time that we invest in it. I mean that's pretty much my job, is to continue to do that, right?
Yeah.
Or a huge part of my job at least. And I agree, and I think that allows us to hear the word fresh. I think our people expect to spend a lot of time, reflecting on the word, and to hear it in new ways, not just in a packaged version, but to continually listen to it. I agree, that would be one of my top ones too. And I like that we still, our kids, work hard in that kind of thing too. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, we start them young, right?
Yeah. That's hope. Okay, so those are two good ones. I would add as a third one. Okay, I don't know if this is on your list or not, but for me, I think a really strong. I think we have a really, really strong theology of baptism and the Lord's Supper as being kind of these core practices of worship, and Christian identity that I think it's a real gift. Again, now a lot of people may not realize this. If you look at non-denominational churches now, okay, the likelihood that they are going to have a baptismal theology that's closer to ours is probably stronger than you might guess.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of community churches that practice believer baptism. Okay, now they might not be as hardcore as we typically are about this is a step in the process of being saved, but it's still very, very common for them to hold big baptismal services, where adults are being baptized, one after the other, and a similar thing is true. I think there's been a rediscovery. By the way, there's some people that have well known, Francis Chan. You ever read Francis Chan? Francis Chan is hey, this sinner's prayer stuff, what are we even doing with this? This baptism's the way to go. Dude, and Ben Platt, okay, he was been a very popular Baptist preacher down in Alabama, has been hey, we need to be insisting on people practicing baptism. That's just a very Pentecostal churches, absolutely. There are a lot more places that when I look around at the religious landscape, I think there was a time where I think our people went to war over baptism all the time. That was the thing that they started with, and I think a lot of churches are going to look back at you and say, "Oh yeah, people need to be baptized."
Yeah, I mean that always seemed like an obvious thing to me. But
and I think that's something we're going to see. I think that's going to be a trend that we see more.
I think it's
more.
Interesting that Paul has either signed out of Jordan's Facebook and into his own, or what I like to picture is that they're both sitting next to each other. And
they're watching it on.
You can't watch it on my phone.
They're watching it on YouTube, but then they're both texting through Facebook.
Maybe that's it.
That's what I think.
We miss you guys.
Oh man. By the way, I told Jasper that Eleanor had seen him and saw. Jasper did the reading this week, and Eleanor was big buddies with Jasper, and I passed on that greeting to him, and he got such a kick out of it. He got real tickled about it. So anyway, that sacramental, the Lord's Supper thing, by the way, is another deal too. I think more and more people are taking an understanding of.
Said pretty much.
What was I talking about? Oh yeah, the Lord's Supper is another space where I see more and more churches like rediscovering that.
Yeah.
And asking, hey, why is it that we don't do this regularly? Now there's still some like stubbornness about regular practice of the Lord's Supper, but as a lot of, especially millennial and Gen X folks are kind of like rethinking the like high liturgy kind of stuff a little bit, the Lord's Supper as a practice, I think, is becoming more and more meaningful to people outside of our fellowship. But anyway, that's one of those things, like that weekly observance of the Lord's Supper and taking communion together, I think is a real strength of our church, and I think it has something that underlines the community, the sense of the community together, and I think that's a real gift. So that would be me, like this kind of sacramental Lord's Supper and communion and baptism, like those things as gifts of the church. I think they're really significant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The last one I had was I feel like a gift from our specific tradition is like a logical approach to our to reading scripture and to our beliefs and our faith, right? Which kind of, we talked about Campbell versus Stone, right? And they both were logical, they both were compassionate, but it seems like we've kind of forked more towards Campbell and less towards Stone. So I think one of the things that we don't get as much that I wish we did was more of that passion. But we definitely, I do think one of the gifts that we have is the logical thought processes and the debate kind of stuff that you were talking about earlier, where we really think out our faith and think
being open to different conclusions.
Yeah.
I think it's, and I think that's even more in the DNA of like Cedar Lane Bel Air. I mean, we're certainly not unique in that, but I do think that's a strong point of our church, is the desire to kind of like relook things and look at it with fresh eyes. And I think a level of like toleration of each other is like, so one of the skills of like being able to be a good interpreter of scripture is being able to hold open multiple interpretations of things. I mean, ultimately coming to a conclusion is good. That's not a bad thing, but like, if you immediately read something and jump to the interpretation, I bet you guys seen some of that. But I think being able to hold multiple interpretations, both in a room where you and I come to a different understanding of something, but also even within yourself, be able to open up and say, well, this is a possibility, and this is a possibility, and this is a possibility, and I can collect evidence for all three of these. And that's a trick.
None of it's completely definitive.
Yeah.
Right.
Being more committed to the scripture than I am to my interpretation of scripture, I think is really important.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that is a gift that in general I've seen from Churches of Christ, but definitely at Cedar Lane, like you're saying, like in
I'll tell you too. I'll call out. Yes, you're right. And that's not accidental, and it wasn't out of nowhere. And from and of course we, several people in our class know more about this history than I do. I think one of the turning points in that, really sealing that identity for our church, I've heard from several people who've kind of recounted for this for me. It really goes back to Brother Neely. Oh man, I lost his first name all of a sudden.
Jim
Neely, yeah. Jim, and I could tell you Ramey, but Ramey didn't leave the study. When Jim was a shepherd, there was a question about how the church was going to handle like divorce and remarriage and people that had suffered through divorces, and there came a point where the approach was like, hey, we're going to have this like full out congregational study, okay, and for people that knew Jim Neely, they would not be surprised to hear that it was like ridiculously thorough, right? So much so that I think sometimes that people, maybe even people that disagree about the end up, are like, okay, it's been a 6-year study, let's just whatever, you know. But this willingness to say, okay, before maybe we were so hardcore that like people that had suffered through a divorce like weren't allowed to like serve at the table, communion table, and things like that. And then went back and did this kind of long study that kind of resulted in some. There were some like policy changes that I think kind of came about because of that, but really I don't think it was as much about the policy as it was the process, right? The process of being willing to jump into this like open study and hold open multiple possibilities of what the interpretation of any of these scriptures would be, and then what they all meant together. I thought that was really, I think it's really, really important, and I think there was this kind of like landmark moment that just kind of decided, hey, we're going to be a kind of church that has this kind of openness, you know, and ability to like really reason and sort through and study and hear evidence and new takes and be willing to kind of hold up what we've always done before in light of, you know, other possibilities and conclusions. And that doesn't mean that every time something comes by, you just change your mind because there's a new idea. But it means like being able to kind of weigh and reason. And of course, you know, given kind of our demographic in engineer land, you know, our church has been, I think, open to like looking at evidence, you know, and looking at stuff and being able to hear rational arguments. And I think that's a gift. Yeah, I think it's a gift. And it's important as we look downstream too. You know, because I hope that like that importance of Scripture, coupled with that willingness, continues to
one of those gifts
help us evolve.
Forward.
Yeah. You know, the elders announced a few weeks ago that we're gonna have a study sometime in the beginning of next year. We're gonna be looking at like worship and particularly like participation in worship, and you know, it's really it's kind of calling on that part of our DNA that says, we have questions about what it means for public, you know, women and children, all that like how we do the worship thing together. Yeah. Let's really kind of look at what the text says together, you know, and let's really be open to rethinking things, you know, if that's what that's what we hear. I think that'll serve us well. You know, that's that part of our DNA will serve us well. That says let's hold up the Scripture, and let's hold the Scriptures and to be more important than just kind of our traditional understanding of interpretation of them. You know. All right. What else from downstream kind of stuff should we think about? Like when we kind of look downstream at like questions about what we have about the future. What you got, man?
Yeah, well, my first question was kind of just, what do you think the state of things are right now? Like, and that's the hardest thing to see, right? You said in one of our earlier lessons, you know.
You mean like right now in terms of like the last 5 years? You mean like October 2020, because I don't even know what's happening in October 2020.
Current history, right? But
sure.
It'll take 500 years before we really nail down what's actually going on.
Yeah, man, the papers that are going to be written about what happened this year.
Yeah, just this year alone.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I saw somebody say that like future historians are really going to have to decide like, we used to like specialize as a historian in like a century or a decade, maybe, and now it's going to be like which month of 2020 am I going to specialize in?
Yeah. You're not kidding either.
For real.
But I think this year has changed a lot of stuff. Like as far as like technology and how we meet together, you know.
We're doing this a year ago.
Yeah. Hopefully this doesn't completely go away. I mean, I want to meet with everybody, but there's so much potential in this, you know, in meeting virtually that, you know, I think that's something that we'll see more.
Yeah.
Going forward. No,
I that's a really good a good point. I do think that one of the questions there is, does the church become just an engine to produce content? Mm-hmm. Like like we have to produce something to broadcast, or how much are we really like a community of people that know and love each other and share life together?
Right,
And
what extent of kind of a relationship can you have virtually?
Yeah.
You know, especially with, like, producing content like this, but even with like Zoom and whatnot. You know, you're not sharing a meal.
So my suspicion is that we'll kind of come out of this, you know, we kind of resume normal, that what we're going to find is that it's going to have underlined the importance of community, because the folks that their relationship to the church is going to survive. Like, those are going to be, I think those are going to be the people that had strong personal relationships through the church. And I think this year, for people whose kind of a connection point to the church was that's where they went to church, I just think like that's going to be not a lot of folks are going to have to rethink that, you know. In the future, I think the church as a tight-knit group of people in community together, which is again part of our DNA. It's one of the gifts of our church. Been part of the way people like think about the family of Bel Air, you know. I think that's for our church is going to be very strong. That'll be a strong sense of that going forward. The question is, how do you move from that to being being tight knit, but also inviting people to come into that tight knitness is really difficult. Okay, the church as show, the church as content, as broadcast, is easily shareable because it doesn't ask those people to participate much further. Yes, watch this, right?
Right.
I mean, how many times do people in our society say, "Watch this," you know? But join this, participate in this, contribute to this, is a different kind of thing. Share this with, you know, with each other is a different. So I think that's one of the questions for me, you know, going forward. One of the questions for me is, as I look downstream, okay, is can we gain a sense of our and I think David spoke to this on Sunday. David Mitchell. If you haven't seen our class from Sunday morning, it was on the second part of the worship broadcast. Man, I really wish you would go and look at that. It was really, really good. David talked at the end about our sense of like we need to be persuading people to come be a part of.
Be a part of this.
Yeah, be a part of this. Yeah.
Good job, Stacy.
Yeah. And David talked about like being a part of. We need to remember that our mission is to go to tell people like, listen, you need to come be a part of the community of Jesus, and it saves your life.
Yeah.
You know, it makes your life different.
Yeah. And that starts right now, not after you die.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, that was the message for so long, right? You join us, and then when you die...
Like, life is different with Jesus.
Yeah,
you know?
in it.
Like,
and I don't think that was ever something that we emphasized enough.
Yeah, and so I think, whereas we talked about at the beginning of this class, the difference of telling people, you need to be part of the Church of Christ, as opposed to, like, some denominational, like, we need to really remember that we need to distinctively tell people, you need to be a part of the community of Jesus. You know, come join Jesus and his life, and be a part of what it means to be a community driven by the life of Jesus and the Spirit of God. You know, and all that. Now, David's talking about that in different terms of like the virtues that Paul talks about as being part of the life of the Spirit and goodness and compassion and mercy and all those sorts of things. But man, it's like there's a difference in being a part of a community that's following the way of Jesus, and it's the right way to live. It's the good life. That's the good life, you know. Can we reclaim that mission to tell people that? I think David really challenged us to that on Sunday, and I hope that'll be a part. I mean, I really think that'll be part of our life going forward.
Yeah.
At any rate. It's worth thinking about, right? It's worth thinking about what are those things that I think about this all the time with my kids. I'm sure you do too. Like, what are the things that are important to teach them, you know, going forward? And I want my kids to really believe that the way of Jesus makes a difference. Yeah, it's important to be a part of people who follow Jesus. Now,
It's the
you
best way
mentioned,
to live.
now, that's not something that we just surround ourselves with those people and shut out everybody else. Like, we have to find, that has to be done with a level of openness that we embrace our neighborhood and our community, you know, and invite people to come join us. We have to know people to do that. We can't just
Right,
put up
yeah.
signs that say, come here.
Yeah. You can't just share your lesson on Facebook and hope that that's enough.
It's not enough.
It's a good thing to do, though. Totally should.
Okay, hey, tell you what, Paul and Jordan and Britton, Isla, and Stacy. I'm not sure that I know. I'm gonna have to make sure I know Stacy sometime. So
Yeah.
that is one of the challenges of this online thing. Is like somebody's here and it's hard to. We kind of would.
Yeah.
There you go. Nice to meet you. Yeah. But we would. We definitely want. We want to know that our community. Oh, that's your mom. Oh, I guess I have better.
Oh, cool. Well, now I see the name.
It's obvious now.
Yeah.
It's obvious. We just didn't know it earlier. Anyway, hey, listen. Thanks for being a part of our class tonight. We're going to, like we said, we're going to jump into stuff next week. We're going to study some of these things and maybe how.
Tobit.
And I don't mean to just study them as a study of themselves. Like, I want to study how they affect like their relationship with the Old.
Hey,
and New
if you want to read ahead, and read Tobit, how can you find that? Because it's not like in any version of the Bible.
Huh?
It's not in like every version of the Bible, right?
Well, yeah. Like most people's copies of the Bible don't have. It's very easy to find online. Okay. You just Google Tobit, and in fact, now I'm not sure about YouVersion.
I was gonna say I have the Bible app.
The Bible app by YouVersion, right?
Yeah. Let me see. This one, just this. Yeah. YouVersion. You could pick a bunch of different versions, right?
Yes.
And there's like a Catholic version with Apocrypha in there.
Okay, yeah.
So
there's a lot of versions of it, yeah. So if you there's New Revised Standard versions of it.
This app right here, the Bible app by YouVersion.
There's a lot, yeah. There's a lot of different ways. But I mean, also if you can just hit the Google, man. You know, you can find it. There's lots of ways of getting copies of it. I remember now that we talked about this before. I think I brought you or gave you a pretty.
You may have. I can't remember because we had a long conversation. I think Enoch was the one that you were really, at that time.
Maybe,
There's some reason that we had.
Or Sirach. I was probably really into Sirach.
Yeah. We were doing wisdom literature at the time, probably.
Hey, listen, let's come back and let's talk about that next week, and we'll talk about some other things too. We're gonna have a great time.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's just do that.
Okay. Hey, real quick. Have we talked about our church at all about if we're getting back together on Wednesday nights?
We have talked about it some, okay? And
is there if there's not an update on that, I'm not trying to put you.
There's not an update right now. There's not an update right now.
No update.
And we're probably it probably depends on. So the biggest change, there's a lot of changes, okay? But we're trying to make sure that we can move forward in ways that we can also staff effectively, okay? For instance, staffing Wednesday night for children's ministry is a much different thing, and particularly, just to be frank, some of our older members that are normally participants in that aren't ready to come back and be part yet because of the increased risk for COVID, and so that's one of the things that play there. Yeah. Okay, it's not the only thing, and another factor is classroom spacing. Okay, so if we come back into classrooms where people have to be it's a little bit different to be in the auditorium. That's why we have a Sunday morning class, is that everybody's in that space, and you're also kind of spread out in the auditorium. There's space to do that. If we went to multiple classes where people are in tighter spaces, that could figure that out. We want to be careful about that, okay? Sure. Because anything that we add right now, we need to be able to do it with proper social distancing in place. So there you go.
Okay.
All right. Okay, everyone. Thanks again for joining us, and especially to Grandma Tasty. We are definitely glad that you were with us. All right. Peace.